Hey everyone, this is Derrick from the Department Number Two podcast, and just want to say thanks for listening. Tonight, I am going to be solo while I speak with my good friend Greg Biggs. Daryl is down with some sickness, so just send some thoughts and prayers his way, and we hope that he gets better for our talk next week. Originally, we were going to be talking about C.F. Smith and his division at Fort Donelson, so we are tabling that discussion because I know Daryl loves that topic. We're going to table that discussion with Greg for a couple weeks from now. And so in the meantime, Greg and I are going to just talk about whatever comes to mind. We're going to start off talking about some logistical things, railroads and steamboats and things like that. And when you got two guys that are just talking about the Civil War, you never know really where it's going to go. So thanks for listening and enjoy the show. All right, so we're here with Mr. Greg Biggs, one of my friends for the last several years, and I guess in a way you're my Civil War mentor, godfather, or something like that.
I am your Obi-Wan.
Yeah, that's right. I'm the Padawan here. For the last several years, and Greg's helped me out with a ton of stuff and research, and my first book, and then the one I'm working on now. So, if you don't know Greg, you should get to know him. He's got about every book under the sun, it seems like. Um, I love going
Not
to that
yet.
meeting. Yeah, on his way to it. And just huge help with research and flag expert. I mean, you name it, he knows it. So, but we're going to talk tonight about logistics and of the Western theater because that's a big topic. And I think you have a presentation. Is it on YouTube anywhere about the Atlantic campaign and logistics?
That's a good. It might be by maybe the Chicago Roundtable. I think I
Yeah,
gave it to them,
I think that's
and
what it was.
yeah, Chicago Roundtable. You can see it, and you also see me in a rare coat and tie. I went to private school when I lived in South America, and I told my wife, I said, that's pretty much all the coat and tie wearing I need to do. Did that for 4 years, but every now and then I have to stick one on. But I think it's when I did it for Chicago Roundtable, that was a lot of fun to do. And Bob Jenkins, who I know you've heard of, um, great Civil War historian down in Dalton, Georgia, who's written a book on like Peachtree Creek and the approach to Peachtree Creek. His book came out about a year or so ago about the controversy at Cassville, which absolutely just nails that shut. He heard me do that talk at the Dalton Civil War show, I think 2-3 years ago. And he, first question was, when are you going to write the book? I said, you're going to pay my, cover my finances so I can quit working and I can do stuff like that. And then things along those lines, Cowan Auctions, who I work with on occasion about flags, had some years ago the complete commissary officer of the Louisville Depot's correspondence.
Oh my gosh.
Up for sale. And I shot my contact there in the email. And I said, obviously, when these sell, you can't tell me who got them. And I understand that. But if you could forward my email to them, because I'd love to get copies of some of those documents pertaining to the Atlantic campaign, because that's going to be Sherman's food and cattle and hogs and stuff like that. And fortunately for Western theater historians, the Filson Historical Society in Louisville bought it.
Oh, awesome.
So yeah, in fact, their archivist sent me a nice letter and said, it'll be a little bit before we catalog all this, but if you want to come up, just shoot me an email. And I haven't been able to get up there and do the digging, but at least for understanding the war in the West. And I think this guy was the commissary commander at the Louisville Depot from, like 62 to the end of the war. So what he's going to have for feeding Union troops from Kentucky to North Carolina pretty much is going to be pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And I'm just envisioning just mounds of papers to go through, but, wearing out a Xerox machine or something. But, so, I mean, which the point of that is and I know you've got friends that you have that are not Civil War buffs, and the question, of course, is then why would you have them as your friends? I mean,
Right. Yeah, they're
yeah,
they're
I
skating on thin ice, so just one slip up, and
yeah, and they bug you like, why do you do this? And
yeah,
now and you've probably gotten this because I've gotten this from friends of mine that aren't into it, and they go like, it's been 160 something years, isn't it all done? And then I just told you about the pile of commissary papers that
yeah.
turned up from the
No, it's not.
commissary officer of the Louisville Depot. No, it's not.
There's so much that still needs to be uncovered.
Yep.
It's so much.
And yeah, the cool story is this family bought an antebellum home in Mississippi. God, this is 20 something years ago, and they were remodeling the house, so they were punching a hole in the wall, and they found 20 something boxes of blockade running documents from a guy that was in charge of contacting the English suppliers for stuff, and it's all the English invoices. And
Wow.
they're at the South Carolina Relic Room in Columbia, South Carolina. I got to see it before the collection got documented. And the first thing I said is, you got to get a hold of Stephen Wise because he's got to revise his book on Lifeline of the Confederacy, his amazing book on blockade running. Because here's the other side of the coin, and this guy just had all the stuff and moved to Mississippi and shoved them in the wall of his house and walled it over, never to be seen again. He thought.
Yeah. Wow. That's cool. So, I remember when you did do that talk on Atlanta, you talked a lot about the different, like, sizes and gauges of the railroads.
Right,
And
right.
I think a lot of people are gonna assume that all railroads are the same, but that is not the case, especially when you get into the South. So can you explain that a little bit so that and, 'cause you think about when Bragg's moving his army from Corinth over to Chattanooga, like, that was not just a simple little loop. There's a lot of other stuff involved there, especially the sizes of the tracks, the types of trains, and all that. So, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the best single volume book on this, and you want to get the first edition because it has the fold out map of the entire Southern Railroad system broken down by gauge and the name
Oh,
of each railroad, by Robert C. Black III. It's called The Railroads of the Confederacy. There's, paperback versions that are out, but you don't get the cool map. And the one with
mhm.
the cool map has the green dust jacket hardcover, and that's an essential book if you want to understand Confederate logistics. But the South always gets knocked because they had 4 major gauges. The North had 6.
Wow.
So
I didn't
one of the
realize
things I
that.
brought out in my Sherman Atlanta campaign logistics program is Sherman in his memoirs, and Albert Castell, the historian who wrote Decision in the West, wrote an essay, a follow-up essay to that. I think, was it Civil War History? It might have been, and it's been published in his book of essay collection. He's deceased now, but called William T. Sherman Prevaricating Through Georgia. And what he does is he takes what Sherman says in the OR versus what he says about the same topic in his memoirs. And one of the things that Sherman says is, so here I am going through Georgia and I'm seeing like the Erie and Lackawanna Railroad and the Fort Wayne and so Railroad and all this stuff. And Castell says, probably not, because unless they were 5-foot gauge, which is what all the railroads were in Georgia and Tennessee and Kentucky, they weren't going to fit on those tracks.
Mhm.
Neither were the locomotives. Now, there was a system that was developed in 1863 where they could raise the car and the locomotive up and drop the carriages and put a widening thing on there, but it was considered unsafe. And then after the war, there was a thing that came up called the Ramsey transfer system that actually was able to do that on a safe basis. So the carriages wouldn't fall apart while they're
Mhm.
carrying 5 tons of stuff or whatever. And then of course, when in the 1880s, when they standardized the railroad gauge to 4 feet 8 inches and a half, which is what they are today, it was easy to do. If you had a 5-foot gauge, you just ripped up one, moved it in a little bit, retacked it. 6-foot gauge, you moved it in a little bit further. 5, 6, same thing. So all you had to do was rip up one railroad and retack it onto the cross tie. But the standard gauge now was a main gauge then, both north and south, but the dominant gauge in most of the South was 5 feet. And for the heartland of the Confederacy, Tennessee, Georgia, and Kentucky had 5-foot gauge. Now let me pull I've got my map out here. You have to look at these these symbols. Like the line going from Atlanta, Georgia to West Point, Georgia was 5 feet. The line crossing from West Point, Georgia to Montgomery, Alabama was 4, 8.5. So what do you do when you get that train and boxcars and black cars to cross into Alabama? You got to offload them on another train.
Yeah.
So
Just the
that's a
time.
problem. That's a problem. Now we're building some 5-foot gauge from Selma to Blue Mountain, which is now Gadsden, Alabama. That is a 5-foot gauge. From Selma west to Demopolis, 5-foot gauge. And then from on the other side of the Tombigbee River, McDowell's Bluff to Meridian, Mississippi is 5 foot. And then the Mobile in Ohio is 5 foot. The Memphis and Charleston is 5 foot. So, once you get past that little bit of line there from West Point, which is Opelika, Alabama to Montgomery, if I'm not mistaken, that's the railroad that Lovell Rousseau hit in his cavalry raid in, I think it was August of 64. And the amazing thing about that is not only was the gauge different, it was strap rail still. And strap rail is you've got your cross ties like cross ties are today. And then perpendicular to that were wooden stringers that were about 6 inches thick. And then they would just tack about a 2-inch wide strap of iron bar on it and then tack it down. If you go to the Tunnel Hill Railroad Museum in Tunnel Hill, Georgia, they have examples of all 3 types of rail. Modern rail is what they call T-rail, and it's much, much thicker and bigger. And if you look at rail lines today, you can see the pounds per yard rating on it. And if it's like over 200 and something pounds per yard, that's mainline stuff like, Louisville, Nashville Railroad going to Kentucky, or the Nashville, Chattanooga in Tennessee that, CSX runs nowadays. But it was much smaller T-rail back then. And then you had U-rail, which was British imported and then tacked down, and then the strap. And the problem with strap rail is because they didn't creosote the ties back then like they do now, with, sealed with that thick oil tar. As the wood rotted and the spikes would loosen, strap rail would bend up like this, and it would skewer the bottom of your locomotive and or your cars. So as railroads expanded in the South, they were ripping up strap where they could and laying down either U-rail or T-rail, and they evidently didn't get that line from West Point, Georgia to Montgomery. And that's the one that, and because the account of from Rousseau's raid is, he says it's real easy to rip it up. You just stick a crowbar under there, just barely put any pressure on, bing, up come the spikes. So that was an old way of doing business. In the Atlanta campaign talk that I did, the section I call How I Spent the Winter in Middle Tennessee of 1863-64 is they rebuilt every inch of railroad that mattered. The line coming from Louisville down, the Mobile, Ohio, the Nashville and Chattanooga, and the bit of the Memphis and Charleston between Decatur, Alabama, and Stevenson, Bridgeport, and then, of course, the Memphis and Charleston into Chattanooga. Ripped everything up. New ties, brand new T-rail, sidings where there didn't used to be sidings, new water towers, new woodlots, and reinforcing trestles where you can. And you've seen those pictures of the kind of prefab trestles where, it's really solid looking with crossbar iron supports. That's the kind of stuff that they did. Replacing what they were calling the beanstalk or cornstalk type of bridges, which were your first bridges after you capture a burnt Confederate bridge. That's what the engineers would build. And then as you leapfrog your supplies forward and you have the time, you'd shut that down for about a week and build the better stuff on it. There's great pictures of the rebuilt Nashville and Chattanooga Railroad Bridge going from Bridgeport, Alabama across the Tennessee River. Because when Bragg retreats from Tennessee, he burns it. And so that bridge that they rebuilt, that's your state-of-the-art Union Railroad engineer built bridge. And they did that in North Georgia. The Etowah River Bridge was a beanstalk, cornstalk. And then in the slide I have is you see the really professional one. Same with the Chattahoochee. And these engineering feats were just amazing. These guys did some of these, 700-800 foot long bridges in 4 days.
That's insane.
Without heavy earth moving equipment or cranes or the kind of stuff that we have now. Now there's a problem because if you're using the original bridge supports, which a lot of them would do, it's great. But on some of the smaller bridges were just embankments, and it's not wide enough to put a bridge support, and you're putting log supports in there, it's just sitting on the creek or the river bottom. And what
Uh-huh.
happens when you get a flash flood? Washes it out.
Oh yeah.
We had Walter Lee up at our round table. Hang on here, or Walter Green, excuse me. His book on the Nashville Chattanooga Railroad, really, really excellent book. And he talked about the engineers having a constantly bad rainstorm. Up, got to run down the line, see what bridges are still there, what bridges we got to fix, because they're just sitting on the river bottom or the creek bottom.
Yes. So how often do they have to do that? Whether from, I mean, just constantly checking things like the bridges. I mean, how often, I guess, how often were the trains running from point to point?
Well, say in Sherman's Atlanta campaign, he was getting up to 7 or 8 trains a day. The minimum he wanted, I think, was 5 with 10 cars. No, he was wanting like 130. It was 130 cars a day. That's what it was.
Hmm.
And so if you've got, say, 10 cars, that's 13 trains a day. And the way he developed it is you're running south from Louisville. Louisville's the biggest depot in the West for the Union. They were smart. They built a lot of it over across the river in Indiana. I forget the name of that town.
New Albany?
Yeah, New Albany. And some of the buildings, by the way, are still there.
Hmm.
And that way, if the Confederates ever captured Louisville, they could sit across the Ohio River and thumb their noses at them. And like, unless you can get over here, doesn't matter what you do. And they had ferries where they could load up rail cars and then float them across, connect them with the railroad, and truck on down to Nashville, which was the secondary depot that was built from the ground up, like the Easton Depot and things like that. And they're just trucking stuff down every day. I mean, just, supplies, and by steamboat, coming into Nashville from the Cumberland, or by steamboat down to Johnsonville, Tennessee, and then taking was it I'm trying to think of the name of that railroad. Hang on. It's it's the one that goes from Kingston Springs to Johnsonville. Hang on. It's line number 72, the Nashville Northwestern. And that was built starting under William Rosecrans, because the Tennessee River was a much bigger river and harder for the Confederates to deal with. Well, at least until Forrest showed up in November
Yeah.
of
He
64.
did the whole thing there.
Yeah, his report said $7 million worth of damage, and I did an inflation index on it. That's 140 million in modern dollars.
Oof, man.
Yeah, it pretty much knocked Johnsonville out for the rest of the war. So it's,
Yeah.
they just ripped the place up. But so it's nothing's impervious to a Confederate cavalry officer that has a real sense of will and attitude and the wherewithal to do it. So,
Hmm.
like artillery and capturing his own navy too.
Yeah. Yeah. That is for sure. Yeah. So speaking of that, the water stuff, I read something the other day. Yeah, I can't remember where I read it. It was something about like for the Western Union armies, they relied more on, I think, on river traffic than they did on railroad traffic. Am I thinking of that right? Because I
No,
honestly I
you're
can't
absolutely
remember.
right. Now there's a problem with the rivers. The rivers go where the rivers are going.
Right.
Um, I remember doing a Tullahoma campaign tour some years ago during the 150th Tullahoma campaign. And then Fort Donelson historian Jimmy Job and then Fort Donelson Chief Ranger Mike Manning were on the bus. And I didn't know they were coming. I got on the bus. I looked at them and said, "What are you guys doing? There's no gunboats here." I mean, the Stones River can't have gunboats. The Duck River, Elk River can't have gunboats. They're way too small for that. So you're only going to be able to use your river transport on the Mississippi, obviously, from all over Minneapolis all the way down to New Orleans. That's as it does today. The Ohio River, obviously, from Cairo, Illinois, up to the Pittsburgh area, where the two rivers form the Ohio River. And then the Cumberland River, you can take large steamboats up to Hartsville,
Hmm.
and from Hartsville on up to like the Mill Springs area,
Yeah.
because there was a little steamboat involved in the Battle of Mill Springs that the
Yep.
Confederates used to get across the river. Those are much smaller boats that are built for a
Yeah.
much smaller river.
Yeah.
Chattanooga,
That's where the river really starts to twist and turn,
yep,
and it's
and
yeah.
gets much, I know you've been to Fort Donelson, where that buoy is on the opposite bank from the water batteries. Jimmy Job told me that's about where the bank was at the time of the battle.
Yeah.
So it's probably, 30, 40 feet slightly wider than it was then. That ain't a lot of feet compared to, over where Fort Henry was in the Tennessee River. And like, that's a heck of a distance across to Fort Hyman, because you had a bigger river, A, and B, the floodplain was bigger. And things of that nature. And then with the Tennessee River, you could take large draft steamboats, large draft meaning 6 foot draw, all the way to the Muscle Shoals, which is Florence to Scumbia. And then you had the 42 miles of the Muscle Shoals. You could cross the shoals if you had exceptionally high water, like 8 or 9 feet over the shoals, which wasn't all that often. But what they ended up doing, and Grant did this once he opened up the Cracker Line, is they built really small steamboats at the Bridgeport Depot, which was right by the side of the Tennessee River Railroad crossing, and then sailed those up and supplied Chattanooga, and those could go all the way up to Knoxville.
Oh, really?
But they're really, really small. You've seen the
Yeah.
pictures of them.
Yeah.
They like a mountain howitzer on the bow for defense,
Yeah.
and they're open sided, and and then you had small gunboats that patrolled that river as well. Some of the ones on the upper Tennessee were Army gunboats, or 3 or 4 Army gunboats up
Yeah.
there. And they would divide the rivers up for defense, the Union Navy, into districts. Like the 11th district ran from the Shoals to Chattanooga, and they would assign X amount of boats to defend 11th district, and then the 12th district, then the 10th district heading towards the turn where the Tennessee goes north, back into Tennessee. That was another district, and they would assign boats there. And then, like in the case of Hood's campaign, they flood the zone. They send in more gunboats from other districts to deal with Hood. So it was a great flexible system based on what was going on. I mean, your favorite Confederate general of all time, John Hunt Morgan, of course, when he crosses into Ohio, they're flooding the Ohio River with tinclads and other gunboats to try to, because they know where the fords are. So you park a gunboat there. You ain't crossing here.
Yeah.
And up above the island, there's gunboats. In fact, Leroy Fitch was the gunboat commander there, and his flagship was the USS Moose, and he's parked at Buffington Island.
Yeah.
Because all this stuff is mapped out. I mean, all these gunboat commanders were civilian guys that ran regular steamboats on all these rivers. So they knew every inch of where the fords were, where the shoals were, where the flat areas with tree trunks sticking out, deep water channels. And that's why when the U.S. Navy starts doing the Brown Water Navy, they had to bring these guys in to run these ships, because there's no naval skipper that knows anything about the rivers. It's
that's one thing I've been picking up when doing that research from stuff I'm looking at right now, the early war stuff. And so many of these guys that are piloting these steamboats, these Army steamers or Navy steamers, whatever they might be, they were civilian pilots before that were on those rivers. Like they know that thing like the back of their hand. Like there's one Confederate ship called the Grampus.
Right.
And that guy, that guy had worked on the Mississippi River his entire life. His father had worked on the Mississippi, doing the exact same thing. And so, like, what this guy knew, he definitely put it to use there. Taking gunboats out of, I think he took one out of Hickman or Columbus. I can't remember, but there was this guy who was like he's from Indiana, and I don't know what his real name was, but his nickname was Yankee, and then his last name, and I can't think of it off the top of my head. But he bought this showboat, and it had like a bunch of almost like not quite circus stuff, but I don't know. He had wax figures and stuffed, big stuffed, huge animals and stuff like that. And for some reason, and this is in August of 1861, this guy thinks it's a good idea to take that boat down to Columbus, Kentucky, where you are in between the Confederates down there at Island Number 10, and then the Union forces up at Cairo. And it's like, you're going to go into that middle area. That does not seem like a very smart idea at all. But he goes down there anyway, and he's got some engine trouble. And so the Grampus shows up, Confederate steamer here. And he tells the skipper of the Grampus, I'll give you money if you tow me up to Cairo. Not knowing that this guy's a Confederate. Yeah, sure, we'll do that. And so he pays them, and then they hook it up, and he starts towing him out. But instead of going right up to Cairo, he turns left. And then that guy finally realized what's happening. He jumps off his own boat and swims to shore. And it talks about the Grampus, the crew. They get a lot of that stuff off the boat, and they start putting on the costumes. And they fix some kind of animal. I can't remember what it was, like a jaguar or something, to like the top of the Grampus. It's like this stuffed huge cat on top of their boat
That's
going
their
boarding.
Viking dragon's head, right?
Yeah, probably something like that. Yeah, and it was like, man, they ended up having a pretty good time after that, but it was like, why? I just couldn't figure out why would that guy do that. It's like this war is on, and you're going to take it right into the spot where you got boats from both sides going in there and prowling and checking out other steamers and stuff and firing on them sometimes. And like, you're going to take your showboat down there. Like, that's a stupid idea. But I haven't been able to find anything else on this guy. I don't know what happened to him after that, but I know he's from Indiana and his nickname was Yankee, and
Was he
not a
from
very smart person.
Evansville or New Albany? Because those were major river port. In fact, New
He,
Albany built a number of steamboats before and during the war. In fact, they built some of the tin clads at New Albany, Indiana.
yeah, he wasn't from either one of those, I don't think. Let's see, his Yankee Bierce was his name,
Okay.
and he was from originally from Lafayette, Indiana, and yeah, he took it down to Hickman, and Captain Marshall Miller is the one that was captain of the Grampus, and they start bringing him down instead down south, and that's when he jumps off. And it was a stuffed lion and a stuffed tiger. They put it on the pilot house.
That's hilarious. I
Yeah,
love stories like that. It just
yeah.
shows
And
you.
then when they got back to New Madrid, Missouri, there, so they charged 10 cents for guests to view the spectacles on board that they had. So they made some money off of it, I guess. And
Well,
sorry
that's what
about the
you do.
tap
That's
dancing sound. My old dog's walking around right now.
that's what you do. I mean, one of the stories when I do Fort Donelson tours, I talk about it's I mean, the first Civil War event that has tourism is obviously First Bull Run,
Hmm.
where everybody comes out from Washington City and sits on the hill and watches the Union Army get shellacked.
Hmm.
And then everybody's running back to Washington. The second one that I know of is the Fort Donelson campaign. At Fort Donelson, there's a guy out of Evansville, Indiana. I forget his name, but I was going through the Evansville papers some years ago, and you can go to page 4, especially on the river towns like Evansville is, and you'll see steamboat information. Like, here's the packet from Evansville to Louisville and Evansville to Cincinnati, et cetera, et cetera. Excuse me. And this guy puts out an ad. He owns some steamboats there. He goes, "Hey, I'm starting a tour down to Fort Donelson. Come and see the captured rebels." And it was like, $5 round trip, and it's like, I love that guy. I mean, besides the story, I'm a businessman, so I love anybody who knows how to make a good buck. And so he starts running guys down, and Governor Morton of Indiana is on one of those boats because there's a
Yeah.
handful of Indiana troops at Fort Donelson, and Morton comes down to see his boys. But then he does the same thing at Shiloh, which had to be a much bloodier thing to look at than Fort Donelson
A
was.
much longer trip too.
And a significantly longer trip. I'm sure it wasn't like $5 round trip, but I mean, I love that kind of a thing where like we've got this river transportation system. And backing up on that, I did some digging in the 1860 census years ago. And what a lot of people think today is the census just counts how many people live here and how many toilets you've got in
Hmm.
your house and all that kind of stuff. No, there's agricultural census, there's industrial census, and they look at all that stuff because that's how you're gauging how your country is growing on
Hmm.
a business financial level. And the 1860 census had 1,000 steamboats on the Ohio, Mississippi River, and tributaries system.
Yeah.
That's immense. That's absolutely immense. And people that don't live on a major river today, which a lot of people don't understand that even today how much traffic moves on rivers because you
Oh
can't
yeah.
ship anything as cheaply as you can by water. That's why you have
Yeah.
1,000-foot container ships,
Oh yeah.
that go across
Yeah.
the ocean and 1,000-foot oil tankers and things of that nature. Well, I remember some years ago I had the Cleveland Civil War Roundtable down, and we did a Cairo to Fort Donelson. I guess it was Cairo to Clarksville thing. So here we are up at Cairo, and at any given time, Cairo's got probably 100+ barges, guarantees, going through because you got the confluence of the two biggest rivers that matter for traffic, barge traffic in the United States. Even though the Missouri River is a much longer river, it's a much more treacherous river. And they were just stunned at how many barges are there because they're Great Lakes people like I am being in the Chicago area. I remember the ore boats and the grain boats that they still see on the Great Lakes today, but they just couldn't believe how many barges were up and down the major rivers. I mean, we get that on the Cumberland, Tennessee River gets barges. Mississippi gets huge barges. I know when Hurricane Katrina closed down the port of New Orleans for some time, it backed barges all the way up to Minneapolis, St. Paul. I mean, because they just had to stack them up because they weren't getting down to New Orleans. And New Orleans is key for the United States in 1860 because it was the number one export port in the United States. All of your crops and manufactured goods from the heartland of America would go by railroad to, say, Memphis or St. Louis or Cairo, where the Illinois Central terminated at the time, etc., and then get unloaded to a flatboats or small steamboats that would go down to New Orleans, offload onto ocean-going ships, and then off to Britain and Germany and Belgium and Holland and places like that American trade was going at the time. And New Orleans is still in the top 3 export cities in the United States because of the amount of barge traffic. You can deep water a freighter up as far as Baton Rouge today.
Yeah, there's a one of the ladies I teach with at school. Her husband is a works those the barges and stuff, and she's talking about he goes down to New Orleans all the time and then comes all the way back up, and that it takes several days, obviously, but that is that is still a very big thing that's going on.
It's huge, and you get there's a YouTube guy that we watch every now and then. He's a towboat guy. And he goes under the name of Mark Twained, Twained. He lives in Oklahoma, but he runs tows up and down the Mississippi, Ohio. He's done the Illinois River. He's done a little bit of the Missouri River, but the tows on the Mississippi River, because the bridges are wider, they'll be 4 or 5 barges wide, and then 8 or 9 barges deep. And when you're heading south of the Mississippi, you're almost like water skiing, because if you go to Memphis and watch how fast that current is, it's pretty amazing. And that's why where the Ohio comes together with the Mississippi at Cairo, the port was always on the Ohio side, because even today with the lock and dam system we have, the current is barely moving on that side of the river, whereas on the Mississippi, it's still significant. You've got, all these rivers just dumping into these other 2 rivers. I read a stat some years ago that was mind-blowing. 50% of the river water in the United States that moves anywhere goes past Cairo, Illinois.
Wow.
50%.
Wow.
And that tells you the importance of Cairo. And I will argue till the day I die that that's strategically the most important place in the United States for at least the first 3, if not first 4 years of the Civil War.
Because
that's the tip of the spear.
Yeah, I mean, that's my research right now, and we've talked a lot about it. I mean, Cairo is I think, like you said one day, it's like a dagger.
It is
going right into the heart of the South, and because it is further south than a lot of the major southern cities. Like I think it's further south than Richmond.
It is. In fact, Cairo is exactly where. Hang on, I'm looking here. It's actually almost where the Virginia North Carolina state line is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty dang close, and it's just you got that railroad going straight down into it.
Yep.
I mean that's you can go from Chicago all the way straight down to Cairo there, and it's just like this place where everything can go out from it. Whichever direction you want to go, you can go there from Cairo. I mean, it's not a great place to be back in 1861. It seems like not the most desirable place to go to. But it's strategically important. Both sides were obviously knew how important Cairo was, because just reading the correspondence on the Confederate side and Union side, I mean, they weren't for sure if they were going to be able to hold Cairo or at least get to it, and then they do send that Chicago militia down to go ahead and take it, but just to make sure, preemptively take it, their own town in their own state. But I mean, the Confederates, once that happened, like the amount of Confederate correspondence where they're like just freaking out that Union forces have moved to Cairo, like this is a big provocation, and it's like they're still in Illinois. It just see just how important that was and how they wanted to take it, how Pillow wanted to march right up there and take it, and it's like, well, how are you going to get there?
Well, and where's the manpower coming from too? I mean, Pillow, if I remember correctly, Pillow's plan, because he works for Bishop Polk in West Tennessee, doesn't get along with Bishop Polk. That's why he'll resign and go back home to Columbia, Tennessee, and then somehow get stuck at Fort Donelson and as the number 2 guy. But the plan was to move across the river from like New Madrid, Columbus into Missouri, the boot heel of Missouri there, which if you know anything about the Missouri State Guard, that was, I think, Division 7 or 9. I forget.
Yeah.
They
Jeff
divided the
Thompson.
state up into geographic divisions
Yeah.
and raised troops. That was Jeff Thompson's land.
Yeah. Yeah.
And hook up with the Missouri State Guard, march on St. Louis, grab the huge arsenal that was there that Nathaniel Lyon's defending against the 1st Missouri militia at the Camp Jackson affair when all the Germans are mobilized to capture those guys, and march across the river into Illinois and come down and capture Cairo. But your logistics, where are they?
Yeah.
Troops, where are they?
You can tell he had not thought through all the details there.
Yeah.
I mean, he is Mr. Dig entrenchments backwards, but the amount that he is referred to as that in the newspapers is pretty funny, and in different letters. I mean, they're just constantly making fun of that guy for what he did in Mexico. But it's
it's a great story. In fact, Nat Hughes's book on the Battle of Belmont, which is a great Western theater book.
Yeah, it is.
I recommend. There's a Louisiana major that he cites in there. He says, "We see Generals Pillow and Polk all the time. We have no confidence in either of them."
Yeah,
which like, yeah, those are our guys. That's who we signed up to follow. And anybody that's studied the Western theater for a decent amount of time knows that Confederate military strategy in the West is totally reactive as opposed to proactive.
right.
And had it been more proactive, I think things could have been different. And I put that blame right on the Jefferson Davis's desk. And
yeah, for sure.
Being from Mississippi, you would think he would know better. And when Beauregard comes out west in January of 62, and he's like reaching down to Governor Moore and, hey, if you want to defend Louisiana, send some boys up here to the Tennessee line. And the War Department finds out about it, goes, nope, cut that stuff off. You ain't getting to do any of that stuff. And so to defend that line that goes from Cumberland Gap to Columbus, Kentucky, there maybe 43,000 Confederates.
Yeah, it's not very many, and so many of those guys don't even have proper muskets, if muskets at all.
Nope.
Yeah, and you're just talking about supply situation there. Confederate logistics and that first winter of the war it's a miracle they got anything. It seems like, for what some of those guys, I mean, they were pulling off miracles, but at the same time, I mean, it's what Johnson was expected to do with what he had was very unreasonable. I mean, the fact that a lot of these, we'll recruit men, but if they're not going to sign up for this, then we don't want them, even though they're armed, but the guys we do want aren't going to be armed. And don't you dare ask for weapons. It's like, because Johnson's asking all these governors, please send men, please send weapons. Then he gets kind of like his hand slapped.
Yeah, he gets smacked down. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And my thing about that is Jeff Davis. I mean, you have to look at the top 5 guys to become the full Confederate generals, which is a rank the Union Army doesn't have. Obviously, the first one is Samuel Cooper, Adjutant General, and number 2 is not Lee. Lee's 3rd. Sidney Johnson is ranked number 2 because Secretary of War for the Republic of Texas, veteran of the Texas War of Independence, the Mormon expedition in Utah, Department of the Pacific is where he was prior to the war. I don't know if you read Tim Smith's recent book on Sidney. His argument is Johnston had all this stuff, but he never really did a lot. In terms of, like say Robert E. Lee, who's as an engineer, he's building Fort Pulaski, he's improving the harbor in St. Louis, he's doing all this engineer stuff, which is what West Pointer engineers were doing prior to the Mexican War and Civil War. And the new book that's out, which I haven't completed yet, is kind of contrarying a lot of what Tim Smith says and some other Tom Connolly, et cetera, about Sidney Johnston. I still think that the bottom line is he's a bad corporate manager. My background is corporate, and in my younger days, I was probably the equivalent in this one company I worked for of like a company commander. I had 40, 50 people under me, but when my pay grade hit something I couldn't handle, I walk across the office to the hallway to the office of my boss and say, can you give me some help with this? And, type of stuff. And then he's sticking his nose in my office every now and then, what's going on, that I need to know what's going on. That's proper corporate management. That Sidney Johnson doesn't do that. He visits Columbus. He issues orders to Nashville to defend Nashville, which the Nashville gods don't want anything to do with.
Not at all.
Hey, we got Bowling Green, we got Clarksville, we got Fort Henry, Fort Donelson, we're good to go. And then when the Army of Central Kentucky is falling back after the fall of Fort Henry, when Sidney Johnson gets to Nashville, he's like, hey, wait a minute, where's all the fortifications that I ordered built? Well, why don't you get on the train and go down and see if your orders are being followed?
Right.
That is a problem. And you can't, I don't think you can skate away from that, but I haven't gotten to that chapter yet in his book. He does make some, I'm forgetting the guy's name, but it's the most recent book, just came out on Sidney Johnson. You know about it. I think we've talked about it online. He makes some really good arguments. And I think I have kind of backpedaled on a few things, but I still think that this one, Sidney Johnson has dealt a poker hand that nobody would want to play.
Right. Yeah, it's there's truth in both arguments, I think. Like he definitely made some major mistakes by, not visiting these places himself, making sure these places are actually doing what they're supposed to be, like at Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, and actually making his subordinates do things. Like a lot of the correspondence that I've been going through is, he'll order Polk or Pillow to, I need you to send X amount of men to Bowling Green, and their response is, oh, can't do it. Can't do it. And it's just, okay. It's like, no, sometimes it took several orders. Like when you're reading the ORs and it's like, he's telling them several times to do something before they finally do. And then, but at the same time, he has dealt a horrible hand. His subordinates are not the best. His weapons and, manpower situation is not the best. I was reading one thing, I was researching the other day. It was a diary from a woman who was in the Shaker Village outside of Bowling Green.
Yep.
And what she's talking about is in October, I believe it is, that some of their neighbors who were more southern leaning were telling the Confederates there that where their wagons were and where their horses were. And then Confederate Army showed up, some officer, some lieutenant or something showed up and confiscated their wagons and their horses and just took off with them. And it's like the fact that they're having to take horses and wagons from civilians because they don't have enough for just Army wagons. It just tells you that these guys are he's in a bind. And I think he could have done a little bit better, but I don't know how much better he really could have done just with the realities of the situation on the ground there. He wasn't getting any help from Richmond.
Yeah, exactly. Zero help from Rich. I mean, like I said, Jeff Davis goes, I send Sidney Johnson west, therefore the problem is solved.
Yep.
I mean, I'm convinced that's what's going through Jefferson Davis's head. As the story goes, having lived in California a number of years ago and learning about the Army or Department of the Pacific and Sidney Johnston, and as these Southern officers were resigning their Army commissions. And we had down near Long Beach, I lived in LA, we had in Long Beach a place called the Drum Barracks Museum, which was a U.S. Army post. And then it was up at Fort Tejon and north of LA in the mountains there and stuff on the stagecoach routes. And these guys, once they resigned, they're having to make their way across California desert, New Mexico territory desert to West Texas, and the U.S. Army at Fort Bliss knows they're coming, and they're sending out patrols to try to capture these guys. And when are they coming? They're coming like in the late summer, which, hey, I love that.
It's time to go through desert
weather out here. It's so dry and no water type stuff. And when Sidney Johnson gets to Richmond, Davis is upstairs sick in bed, and he walks into the Confederate White House, and Davis supposedly says, I'd know those boot steps anywhere. Those are Sidney Johnson's boot steps. And he's thinking in his head, my life is 100% better now than it was 3 hours ago. And it's one man can't, there's almost like not quite a modern corollary, but if you've seen the movie Khartoum about the city in Sudan in the, I think it's 1870s or 1880s, when the Mahdi uprising was going against the British and the Egyptians there. the British government says, we'll send Gordon Pasha there, and the problem is solved. Well, you kind of needed to send Gordon Pasha about 8 or 9,000 troops too, because he ended up getting slaughtered when
Hmm.
Khartoum falls to the Mahdi forces. So there's a parallel. If you're going to solve a problem, add the manpower to solve the problem, and the weapons, and the food, and the wagons, and
Yeah.
everything else that you need. I mean, Tennessee raised some regiments in '61 that by the end of the year were ordered by the War Department because they couldn't get weapons to disband.
Yeah.
So, say you're a volunteer and you want to fight for the Southern cause, and now you're told to go home. How does that temper your resolve to fight for the
Right.
Southern cause from that point on?
Right. Yeah. And speaking of how they weren't doing him any favors, like just the fact that the supplies that was in Nashville that Richmond was siphoning off towards Richmond,
Mm-hmm.
and Johnson writes a letter. I can't remember if he wrote it uh, to Benjamin or to Davis or somebody, but he said, if you're going to take all the powder that I need for this amount of time, at least tell me.
Yeah.
Because they were just sending it straight to the ordnance officer there and ordering him to send it all to Richmond, which he was doing. And then he tells Johnston, "Hey, I got this order here." And then, I mean, you don't know how Johnston reacted, but I can imagine it wasn't good. Just like just reading the tone of it, it's just like you can tell he's just fed up with it. Like, quit taking my stuff, and if you're going to take my stuff, at least tell me about it.
Yeah, so I can come up with a plan B or whatever. Yeah, because north of Nashville was the Sycamore Powder Mill. It's near Ashland City, and there was a smaller one down around the Manchester area that's producing the powder. The percussion caps that the Confederates used at First Manassas were made at the Nashville Percussion Cap Factory
Mhm.
and shipped
Yep.
to Richmond. And then, of course, when Middle Tennessee falls in February of '62, all that stuff's getting loaded up on the railroad, and their new change of address is now the Atlanta Depot.
Right.
Same guys, Moses Wright and all these other
Yeah.
guys,
Yeah.
Hippolyte Oladowski, they're all just getting a new post office box that a little bit further south. It's just and in terms of, and Ben Cooling brings this up in his book on Fort Donelson that he did, that the industrial repercussions of Confederate loss after the capture of Henry Donelson in Nashville and Clarksville is the loss of the greatest concentration of iron furnaces in the Deep South.
Hmm.
And he calls it a proto-Ruhr, R-U-H-R, is like the German Ruhr River
Right.
industrial heartland of Germany. And he's right. I mean, you've got furnaces in North Alabama around what's going to become Birmingham. Birmingham didn't exist then as a city. And then the Valley of Virginia has some, North Georgia has some where all the iron veins are, but nothing like the 40 or so furnaces that are, in Middle
Especially on the
Tennessee and up
Cumberland River there.
LBL towards Kentucky.
Right.
And I mean, that's a huge drop. So now you put pressure on Northern Alabama and these other furnaces to have to ramp up the pig iron so they can do things like roll iron rail for the railroads,
Mhm.
which will drop off once they start building ironclads.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one of the things and Harold, I think his name is Harold Wilson. I've got it. Thought I brought his book. Oh, I didn't. I think it's Harold Wilson wrote a book called Confederate Industry, and he used Kate as a case study, Alabama. And a lot of these industrial centers were developed in the 1850s by Northerners moving south, seeing a new market. So we'll buy some furnaces or build some furnaces and go online. And then when the war begins, they become Confederates, if you will, because they want to make money too.
Right.
So they roll with the punch and start producing for the Confederacy. And one of the things that if you've read like Josiah Gorgas's diary or the biography on Gorgas, who's the ordnance guy, and Harold Wilson's book on the Confederate industry, Richard Goff's book, Confederate Supply, the Confederacy is not industrially poor. If they had been, the war's over in a year tops.
Right.
But Virginia, Georgia, and Tennessee, in that order, were the deep industrial states of the South, with Alabama being number 4. In fact, Georgia's industrial might between 1850 and 1860 in the census, they were calling it the Massachusetts of the South. It just exploded.
Mhm.
And it's designed to support steamboats, railroads.
Mhm.
So you need to be able to make boilers. You need to be able to cast, wheels for rail cars and things to make steamboats work, and all this stuff made out of iron. And then when the war begins, they just roll with, okay, we can cast some cannons, we can do, make some swords, like Nashville plowshare swords that they made plows. Start making swords.
Yep.
It's an and the North does the same thing. You've got a business that makes something, and now you got a war, and like, hey, look at all the cash we can make, and roll with the punch. And both sides do it for patriotic reasons.
Uh-huh.
And which is a major miracle. But the South becomes, and then the government expands their industrial base by investing a lot of money into foundries in Atlanta, Macon, Georgia, Columbus, Georgia, the massive powder works at Augusta, Georgia, that Ted Saffis is doing a book. Well, he co-wrote a book on that, but he's got a biography of George Raines coming out. I mean, that was a 2-mile long complex of powder mills. Huge. It just the biggest in the world, I believe. And it's so efficient, they could work 5 days a week. Sun up to sunset
during a war where your country was invaded.
During a war. That's how good they were. And I mean, to me, the biggest mistake of Sherman's March to the Sea is the heck going with, Milledgeville and Macon, head towards Augusta, which only had about 3,000 or 4,000 local troops there and Wheeler's cavalry. Take Augusta offline, that war's over in 2 months.
Right.
Because the Confederates run out of things to go bang with.
Yeah.
Now, you've got Selma, Alabama grows. You've got the Selma foundry that starts casting the big Brook rifled naval guns. They have a naval powder works there. Large cannon powder is a different grade than rifle and pistol powder is. And so that expands. And in fact, one of the things I talk about, the Lady Polk at Columbus burst.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that.
Yeah, the Lady Polk blows up. And I knew a guy that lived in Hickman. He's passed away now, but he wrote an essay, and I met him a couple of times at Columbus at the park there, about what was the Lady Polk. And then he thought it was a 6.5-inch rifled Tredegar cast Columbiad.
Yeah, I've seen so many different like what it's been like. I've seen it called so many different guns.
Exactly. He's pretty certain it was a 6.5-inch rifle Columbia, but you're right. I don't think the jury's 100% what it was, but it blows up, and of course Polk gets kind of beamed in the head a little bit.
That whole story is I just got done writing that part in the next book, and that whole story is, you always hear, well, Lady Polk just blew up and almost killed Polk. Like the other things that are going on around, the other guys that are killed, I mean, several men are killed. And or just blown up. And there's, one guy's talking about there's a leg here, a torso there that doesn't have anything on it. This one guy, and it talks about the cloud that's there, and Polk's just sitting there halfway dazed. One guy says, half of his clothes, Polk's clothes got blown off in the process. But like what you say, the different types of powder. One thing that everyone seemed to assume at the time was that during the Battle of Belmont, that thing was firing across the river, at the Union Army. And apparently they left it loaded. So, it was really hot. The barrel had expanded, and then as it cooled, it contracted. And then so when they went up to fire it, and the reasons why they were firing it, I've seen several different reasons. One was they just wanted to show off the gun for Polk. Another one was they needed to clear it out or something. Like you start getting all these different conflicting reports on this. And but they say, they thought that the reason it blew up was because the barrel had contracted and it just couldn't do what it was supposed to, and so it just blew up. But then, like what you said, you read that essay and met that guy. I can't remember where I read it. I might have found that essay online. But where I read where it was the wrong type of powder, and that probably had something to do with it as well. That they didn't have the right stuff.
Chemistry is chemistry. It's you're not gonna, you can't change that. But I was talking to him one of the times he was at Columbus about the 6.5-inch rifle Columbiad that's in the upper battery at Donaldson. And he said in his research on 6.5-inch Tredegar cast Columbiads, that's one of the very few that fired in anger that did not burst. And it's the same size tube as the 10-inch smoothbore that's at Donaldson in the lower battery there. And that one didn't burst because it's cast in a different way. That when you bore out the rifling, it weakened the iron. Is what he thought would happen. And when you get to Selma casting these big Brook rifles, and if you want to see some great Brook rifles, go to the National Civil War Naval Museum in Columbus, Georgia. They got a bunch of them laying there on the ground, and there's one on a chassis that every Saturday they shoot it at Alabama. It's
Mhm.
because it's right across the Chattahoochee River. But these are massive bandit guns, and when Selma starts making them and putting them out mainly for the Confederate Navy, their advertising slogan is "Selma guns never burst." So take that, Tredegar Ironworks.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. It's their shot at the Tredegar Ironworks. Um, when I can get you to come down, so I can load you up with like 3 boxes worth of my stuff. I've
Yeah.
got his
I'm
essay,
good.
and
Yeah.
it's a fascinating, super nice man, and I'm forgetting his name right now, but he's one of those guys, and you've met him, guys like this, and you'll continue to meet guys like this. They have their little niche, and they deep dive into that niche until they
Right.
reach the center of the planet.
Yeah. They know it all of it.
Yeah, God bless guys like that,
Yeah.
because it helps guys like you and me and listeners and other historians, fill in gaps,
Hmm.
because you can't be all things, all the time. There's just not enough, time in your lifespan, for one. You've got other things to do in your life. Um, but I love guys like that just did the deep dive and taught me so much about artillery in terms of the fortifications, because Columbus, Kentucky is phenomenal. I mean,
Okay.
142 heavy pieces of artillery are shipped there versus 17 at Fort Henry and 11 at Fort Donelson, 6 at
Big
Clarksville,
difference.
and 8 at Nashville. Where's your
Uh-huh.
priority at? It's
Right. Yeah.
it's Mississippi River. But because back to what the commerce does, when the Confederates do take Columbus, and of course when they even take New Madrid, Missouri prior to that, um, it corks the bottle. And so you've got all these farmers in Illinois and Minnesota and Wisconsin and Iowa that no longer can get their crops to market. So they're going to pick up the phone and call their congressman and go, "Hey, wait a minute. What are we going to
Open up
do
that
about
river.
this?
Yeah.
My family's going to starve, and the railroad's not even close to where I live. So, how am I going to get these crops to market?" And that's what, does the Mississippi River campaign, which of course Lincoln, being a guy on a flatboat as a younger man, tweaks to the Anaconda Plan. Is okay, Anaconda Plan's great, but we need an offensive on the river to get that commerce back open, so my
Mhm.
constituents, don't want to throw me out of office in 1864. Which is exactly what, what's the impetus behind all of that stuff. So you've got the cork in the bottle at Columbus. The capturing of Columbus helps out, but then you've got to have Farragut coming up from the south, and then
Yep.
the Union fleet, coming down from the north, and the Confederates send those 8 wooden gunboats up. Hollis sends them up to they will fight near Columbus at Plum Run Bend, and
Mhm.
Battle of Memphis, where they get just obliterated by the
Yep.
LA Rams.
And then
With
float
the
away.
home crowd up on the bluffs cheering your guys on, and you watch your fleet getting blitzed, and
Yep.
uh, and of course Farragut can't get up above Vicksburg with his deep draft steamers, and he's only got like 3 or 4,000 troops with him, so he can't grab
Yeah.
Vicksburg.
You can't do much with that. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's your what if Farragut had enough guys to grab Vicksburg in '62. Boy, does that change the war in the
Yes.
West?
Look up Gideon Wells is, Secretary of the Navy is telling him your orders were to go up past Vicksburg, do all that and take Vicksburg. And writes back like, what? You don't know what's going on out here at all. Just completely no touch with reality there. And because, he's got like a brigade with General Williams,
Mm-hmm.
which he says like only a few thousand men. And he's estimating Vicksburg's got a whole lot more than that by that point. And, they can't elevate their guns enough to even shoot at anything at Vicksburg. And the mortar boats, the second time they go up there, can only do so much.
Right.
And so, yeah, he's just like, what do you, and my boats are ocean going boat ships. They're not meant for this kind of thing here on the river. It's some wear and tear on those ships, especially after, they were fighting down at, Fort Jackson and,
Yep. Fort
is
St.
it,
Philip.
is it
Yep.
St. Philip? Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, they win that, but they do take some damage, and I
Yep.
mean, they go right up there, and it's, that place doesn't just surrender like Vicksburg or like New Orleans did, where you
No. Yeah.
sail in
Exactly.
and
No,
it's
there's some
yours.
serious fighting, down there. But your point about in terms of the Navy coming up there, not and Gideon Wells not understanding Farragut's logistics, although he's got a secure line. I mean, he's got the Mississippi River
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
do that. But like I said, when his boats get damaged, you got to take them down to a Navy yard, which will be Pensacola, is the closest one for repairs.
Mhm.
So that's a bit of a haul. But the other thing is on the Union side of that, William Stark Rosecrans faces a similar thing with Montgomery Meigs, the quartermaster general. When after the Battle of Stones River, he's got a lot of cred now with the War Department because he just won a battle that offsets the debacle at Fredericksburg a couple weeks
Mhm.
earlier. And on the eve of the Emancipation Proclamation coming in, which now gives some military cred to back it up. And
Mhm.
and Rosie is going to run that into the wall. I mean, it's like, okay, I
Yeah.
need more horses. Okay, they'll send him 5,000 horses. Well, these are junk horses. Why don't you
Yeah.
send better horses? They cost the same amount of money. I want to mount my cavalry up to deal with Forrest and Wheeler and Woodward and Morgan and stuff. And one of the great smart comments that comes from Washington is, "Why don't you put your infantry in some wagons?" And 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 Rosecrans' response is brilliant. He says, "Well, that would do great on Pennsylvania Avenue, but not so much on the roads of Middle Tennessee." I mean, your roads outside of Nashville or Macadamized is only like 10 miles in any
Right.
direction. And then the roads are falling apart because all the men that were repairing them for a living are where? Confederate Army or some
Yeah.
of the Union Army
Yeah.
or whatever. And when Meigs comes down, when Rosecrans is in Chattanooga, he kind of apologizes to Rosecrans and said, I had no idea
I didn't know it
this
was
is
this
what
bad.
you were dealing with. It's like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, don't just sit in Washington and look at a map. And unless it's a topo,
Yeah.
you have no
Yeah.
clue what's going on out here. I mean,
Yeah.
the Western theater for both sides is a logistical nightmare initially for the Union and the Confederates, and
Mhm.
whoever side wins that is going to win.
Mhm.
And it's the Union that does it. Plus, the intelligence enough to create the Brown Water Navy. Captain John Ryder's coming to Cincinnati and building the 3 timberclads there, and then Flag Officer Foote and building the Eads gunboats at Mount City and St. Louis in Carondelet shipyard there, and then converting the Benton and the Essex, and then building later some of the turreted ironclads, and they build like 70 tin clad boats to protect, not only just project power, but to escort convoys, which are going to be
Yeah. Just
important because
the amount of ships they have on the naval and army boats that are patrolling, it's enormous. Like you would not think that there was that many armed ships with sizable crew, patrolling all these rivers. They're patrolling Mississippi River,
yep,
Ohio to some extent, Cumberland, Tennessee. Then they're going into the White River into Arkansas
yep,
or Red River.
Arkansas,
What's
Red
that?
River
Arkansas,
down in
Yazoo
Louisiana,
River. I mean,
yep,
all these little side rivers they are going into, and they just yeah, just the number of boats that they have, it's unreal. Just, ironclads, timberclads, tinclads. It's and then just all these just regular army just gunboats with just a steamboat with a cannon on it. And
yeah, exactly, yeah, it's somewhere north. When they move the Navy Yard from Cairo up to Mound City, up the Ohio River, it becomes arguably the largest Navy Yard in the United States during the Civil War.
Mhm.
Over 100 warships and 200 plus transports and hospital ships. I mean, the first hospital
Yeah.
ship in American history is the Red Rover. It was a former Confederate boat that was captured. They converted it to a hospital ship. There's pictures of Red Rover online. And then the Mound City Naval Hospital, which stood until the 1960s and it burned down. It's where the Archer Daniels Midland Riverport is now. Um, that was huge. And if you're in the
Mhm.
Navy, you had that. And then you've got your logistics hub there. And because the Illinois Central spurred into Mound City as well as going into Cairo. You had a Charles Gallagher was a Ohio guy that lived in Cairo, and he had a bakery, and he starts making hardtack for both the Union Army and the Union Navy. His house in Magnolia Manor still stands there. There was another Ohio guy that got into war contracting and stuff for the Union. It's just this magnificent, huge. The North being ahead of the curve because they had an industrial base and a logistics base because they already had an army and a navy extant. The Confederates are starting from square one and then building
Yeah.
this, which
And
it's
they're so unorganized too, because you've got Confederate Navy, you have the civilian river defense fleet, which does not take orders from the Confederate Navy.
uh-uh.
It will not take orders from them. And then you've got Confederate Army vessels, and it's like all three of them are trying to do stuff, and there's a lot of overlap, and none of them are cooperating with each other. And it's like that is a moment where you should have had commander in chief step in and
Yep.
be like, no, this is all gonna be under one person. Oh yeah, and also you had the Louisiana State Navy down
Yeah.
there in
Oh, yeah. Well,
Louisiana.
Georgia had a state navy,
Yeah,
Virginia had a state
yeah.
navy for a time, North Carolina had a state navy, and then
Mhm,
most of those, if not all of them, roll into the Confederate Navy because a lot of those
mhm.
officers become officers in the Confederate Navy. But there's kind of a Union flip side of that, and I talk about my Sherman Atlanta campaign logistics saying um, Sherman's railroad guy Lewis Parsons. It's basically they try to use patriotism to
Yeah,
obtain enough cars, like from
yeah,
especially from Kentucky.
yeah.
Two things that they have to do is Kentucky being 5 foot gauge thankfully for them, they go to the Kentucky railroad heads and say, hey, we'd sure appreciate it if you give us 6 or 7 locomotives and 20 or 30 box and flat cars here and that kind of stuff. But then it's kind of a carrot and stick. It's like, okay, here's the other side of the coin. If you don't do this, we'll subordinate you to the United States Military Railroad and we'll put you under this guy's command. And then you have to do it. And we're going
Mhm.
to pay you what we're going to pay you, the end. Now, how do you want to? It's like a column A or column B. How do you want to play ball? And most
It's
of
like
them
when
go, we'll do the column A, thanks.
yeah, it's like when my kids were younger, I give them the option, either you can walk in here and do it yourself, or I can pick you up and take you in there. Your
There you go.
choice. You're going in there no matter what. So, I never really had to do the second part, but yeah, it's funny the little extra nudge that was required.
Yeah, and so what does the union the locomotive works, the ones in, Pittsburgh and New Jersey, like Baldwin and stuff, they will start making 5 foot gauge cars and locomotives. And then they ship them down the Ohio River to Louisville, lift them up and drop them on the L&N and off they go.
Uh-huh,
And so this Erie and Lackawanna and the Black's book that has the map is only the Southern Railroad system. I have not seen a map of the Northern wartime system.
uh-huh.
I think something like that needs to be done.
Yeah, definitely.
But there's people understand why the gauges were different. You had competing railroad companies.
Yeah.
Derrick Lindau's railroad company running from Owensboro to Louisville is, say, a 6 foot gauge. Greg Biggs's railroad company running from the Green River up to Louisville is a 5 foot gauge. And we meet in Louisville, but my cars can't fit on your track and your cars can't fit on my track because to you, I'm a competitor.
Right.
And to me,
Eliminates competition. Yeah.
a lot of these places are not thinking a national through fare railroad system. So when you look at
Business decisions.
yeah, when you
Yeah.
look at Longstreet coming west, when Burnside takes Knoxville in September '63 and cuts that 5 foot gauge railroad that runs all the way to Lynchburg, Virginia. By the actually even further than that, but mainly to Lynchburg, Virginia. Longstreet has to go down through the Carolinas, North and South Carolina into Georgia. When he gets to Georgia, he's good to go because Georgia had what we call through tracks. You didn't have to stop at
Mhm,
one part of Richmond or Raleigh, march through the town and get on another train that was a different gauge because these two competing railroad companies are idiots,
mhm.
not wanting to help the other guy out. That's basically what it was. So that's why it takes so long for Longstreet to get down. Besides being significantly longer, you've got to march through this town. I mean, all the roads that come into Richmond, they don't tie up. They do in
Mhm.
Nashville, they do in Chattanooga, they do in Atlanta, things like that, where you can just take a train and just keep right on going, not even have to get
Yeah.
off and do that. So there's some people that I think don't understand the Southern Railroad system. Um, Black's book is a great way to learn. And there's a really awesome website. It's
Yes.
CSArailroads.org. And I think there's a
Yep.
from between the CSA. That guy is light years ahead. He's got all the
Yeah.
OR reports for every railroad there is and
Yeah, that guy's done some
Southern
work,
Railroad.
and and he's got a lot of maps on there too.
Yes, he does.
That's pretty helpful, especially when you're wanting to know, okay, this little bitty obscure railroad was mentioned in a report, and then he's got the map of it, where it ran, where it started, and where it ended, and it's got its gauge on there, and it's so you can really see, okay, when this is ordered from this place to that place, you can see why it was such a problem to get there and why it took so long because, like, when they were trying to move stuff from Columbus to Bowling Green, that bridge across the Tennessee River was not quite finished there, and
It
so
opened in November of '61.
yeah, 'cause they were talking about how they would get to the Tennessee, and then everything would have to be ferried across,
Yep.
and then get back on the railroad and send them back up towards, Clarksville and then up to Bowling Green,
Yep.
and it finally, that bridge does get finished.
That was cat food dropping. Sorry about that. my
That's
cats
some
my
excitement
cats are
there.
happy. There's a bunch of cat food on the floor.
But yeah,
But
it's like that. Just those sorts of things are. It really puts a lot of other stuff in perspective.
well,
When
I
you
mean, I'm
realize
glad
what.
you brought that up because let's talk about John Bell Hood's logistics line going into Tennessee, which
Mhm.
I've got mapped out. I don't have what's everything in the depots, et cetera, et cetera. So Sherman
Sure.
obviously starts his march to the sea in November, and he heads towards the beach in Savannah, and he cuts. I'm following the lines here. He cuts the railroad, the Macon and Atlanta Railroad, and then he cuts the railroad that goes from Macon over to Millen, because that's the one that heads towards Savannah. Now the Confederates will run around after he gets to Savannah and rebuild some of this stuff, but if you read Black's book, by late '64, the Confederate railroad system is literally falling apart. I mean, there's no when the industrial base, the choice is I can roll new railroad iron or iron plate for the ironclads. I
Mhm.
can't do both.
Yeah.
So tell me what you need. So there's not a lot, if any, replacement iron coming from the foundries, and the Atlanta foundry's gone. The
Yeah.
Etowah foundry north of there that had rolled some railroad iron is gone. So you've got basically Tredegar and a couple other smaller ones that can roll railroad iron that can get it, get it to you to replace it. So they're ripping up trunk lines and replacing track as needed. So it and iron is not steel, and your tracks are maybe like 4 inches tall versus about 8 or 9 inches now, and they're literally wearing out. And he talks in his book about railroad trains going no more than 5 or 6 miles per hour because any faster they will literally roll off because the iron is just worn out and can't be replaced. So they repair that line in Georgia. So what comes out of Georgia? The powder from Augusta, Macon Cannon Foundry, Columbus, Georgia Cannon Foundry, and the arsenals there that make ammunition and rifle ammunition, artillery ammunition. So once they rebuild that, if he's getting powder out of Columbus, it has to go down to Millen, over to Macon by rail, from Macon to Columbus by rail, across the Chattahoochee River. There is a bridge there, which, if you know about the Battle of Columbus, when James Wilson's cavalry comes through in '65, there's a battle at that bridge. And then it goes by railroad on a different gauge to Montgomery. And then Montgomery to Selma is 25 miles on the Alabama River. And if Braxton Bragg is in 1862 is writing the War Department and saying we need to complete this rail length to have another east-west railroad to back up the Nashville and Chattanooga and the nominally east-west Memphis, Clarksville, and Louisville, which bridge doesn't get done across the Tennessee River till November of '61. Then you're on a 5-foot gauge train to New Bern, Alabama, the Tom Bigby River, no bridge. So you're having to ferry it off again on a boat, although that's not a 25-mile riverboat ride. It's just across the river. And then 5-foot gauge to Meridian, Mississippi, where there's a depot. And then it goes north on the Mobile, Ohio to Corinth on a 5-foot gauge railroad. And the Federals had abandoned Corinth. So the Confederates came in and took over. And Hood orders the Memphis and Charleston to be rebuilt, but they can only rebuild it as far as Cherokee, Alabama, which is 18 miles away from Tuscumbia, Florence at the Muscle Shoals. So from
Mhm.
there, they can either ford the Tennessee River if the water level is working, or train to Cherokee and then wagon train to the pontoon bridge across the river, or being ferried across the river. And then it's wagon train to get to Pulaski, Tennessee, and the Nashville Decatur Railroad. And then they put that line back in service from Pulaski, Tennessee to Franklin. According to the OR, 2 locomotives and 8 cars. And then from Franklin, and of course, that's obviously after the Battle of Franklin's over, you're wagon training it to Nashville.
Mhm.
So that's not a line of supply. That is rickety stuff. Steve Davis, in his book on second volume on John Bell Hood, goes into how Hood is working for Beauregard in the West, and Beauregard has amassed a bunch of supplies at Blue Mountain, Alabama, now Gadsden, and Hood goes down and meets him, but then takes his army up to Guntersville on the river. And Beauregard's like, wait a minute, I got all these supplies stockpiled here. There's no north-south railroad in Alabama. So he has to take all that down to Selma and then follow that line I just outlined for you to set it up north to Hood. Hood doesn't capture Allatoona Pass and the million-plus rations that are stored there because he didn't send enough combat power to capture it. He sent a his smallest division under Samuel French, doesn't capture it, and then by the time he gets to Florence and Tuscumbia, and he fails to capture Decatur, Alabama, by the way, he's out of food. His men are hungry, and they're sitting there on the south side of the Tennessee River waiting for Forrest. Now, some guys put the blame on Forrest for being late. Forrest doesn't work for Hood. Forrest works for Richard Taylor. Taylor authorized Forrest to go up to Johnsonville and destroy Johnsonville and up to Fort Hyman and create havoc on the Tennessee River, which he does. Then he gets an order to, when you're done, you're to meet General Hood and support his army for the invasion of Middle Tennessee, which Forrest is going to do. But some people blame, well, Forrest was late. Forrest didn't work for Hood. Forrest was coming back from a raid that had been authorized to do. So you've got an army that's literally starving, and I will argue those 3 weeks in the Shoals destroys his hopes of anything happening Confederate favor in Middle Tennessee. It can't happen. He doesn't have enough manpower. His logistics are god awful. He does get some food when he comes up into Middle Tennessee, but that area is heavily picked over, as is northern Alabama, because both sides have been living there for what, 2.5 years?
Yeah.
Eating
Constantly
everything in sight.
Yeah. And it's we gotta probably need to wrap it up here. Usually we try to keep it at around this time, but it just goes to show the logistics part, and we talked a lot about just stuff that's going on behind the lines where the armies are at. Sorry, my pup has decided to join us here.
That's okay.
Checking out that microphone. Yeah, just all that stuff going on behind the lines. That is what's setting up what's actually going on up at the lines. And it's like
your book that you did on Adam Rankin Johnson and the behind the lines logistics raids that he's doing, and he's not Wheeler or Forrest. He's next tier down. And then he and Tom Woodward, look at the havoc those two guys are causing.
Yeah.
I think, the sad thing is we know Woodward doesn't write any reports, which gets him fired from command, which is too bad because it would have been fascinating to see what he actually did. So the Union reports that say Woodward here, Woodward over there, I think half of those are for McNary or some other guys because Woodward could be in 2 and 3 places at one time.
Yeah.
But he gets blamed for more than what he actually causes, which becomes a pretty big boogeyman to the Union rear logistics area. Your book shows that really, really well. Ben Cooling's second book, Fort Donelson's Legacy, which I think is a very appreciated Western theater book, goes deep dive into all of that stuff from central Kentucky and northern Alabama. If you don't have control of your lines of supply, I don't care if you're Napoleon. Does not matter.
Right.
And you've got to be able to, read Richard, I think it's Richard Lammer's book, the biography on Rosecrans. He does deep dive into Rosecrans going to war with the War Department over his logistics. And rightfully so. And when Morgan takes down South Tunnel at Gallatin, that line's down for 98 days.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. It's amazing. And that's why he has to lean on the Cumberland. So then the Confederates start hitting the Cumberland at, Harpeth Shoals and at Palmyra and try to catch it at Dover and stuff. All of this is all interwoven with the main front campaigns. And I think Cooling in his book, Fort Donelson's Legacy, brought up an interesting point. The Confederate strategic failure was to tie in main force cavalry raids and rear area guerrilla activity with the movement. So say Bragg's army and Kirby Smith's army into Kentucky. Can you imagine those two forces coming in with all of that rear area stuff being hit by a superior Confederate mounted army? And just what could have been had that been better coordinated. And it goes back to what you were saying about, this fleet was under this guy's command, like Charles Ellet's Ram fleet at Memphis. He wasn't under Charles Davis, which honked Davis off. He answers to, directly
to the war.
Him. It's hilarious, but both sides will try to clamp down on that and improve it by 64. And to a better extent, both sides, particularly the North, really
Yeah.
gets their P's and Q's in order about, okay, if we're going to do this, let's act professional.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's to end here? What's that quote about logistics and tactics?
Amateurs study strategy and tactics, professionals study logistics.
There you go.
And that's absolutely the truth. I mean, I do a lot of Army staff rides for units at Fort Campbell, and for whatever reason, I seem to end up with more logistics units. Which, coming from
Mhm.
corporate America, where I work logistics, it's like that's my jam. I can
Yeah.
nerd out on logistics for hours, and you and I have in our emails and phone calls and stuff like that. As we are tonight, I speak their language because I get it. And corporate and military is really no different. It's getting supplies in, dispersed out,
Yeah.
and how to do it quickly, efficiently, at the least cost possible. Um, and that's what both sides are trying to learn to do during the Civil War. And the North is just, I mean, Montgomery Meigs, the quartermaster general of the Army, he's not even a trained quartermaster; he's an engineer
Yeah.
by training.
Yeah.
He builds the aqueduct, the water aqueduct on the Upper Potomac that brings the waters to Washington that they still use today.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Read biographies of Montgomery Meigs. There's like 4, I think, out now.
Mhm.
Goff's Confederate Supply, Robert Black's Railroads, the Confederacy. If you want to nerd out on 4 Western Theater Railroads, Dan Lee, who you may know, he's there in Kentucky. I would suggest if he is up for getting him on. He's written a book
Yeah.
on Mobile, Ohio, and another book on the L&N Railroad in the Civil War. So these are both Civil War focused. And then a guy in Atlanta named Todd DeFeo has the Memphis, Clarksville, and Louisville wartime and post-war
Yeah.
where they get
I
subsumed.
saw that one online and I thought
Yeah,
that's one I need to get.
yeah, we sell it at our local train station here.
Yeah.
And then Walter Green from Franklin does the National Decatur Railroad. So there's your 4 main lines. Now, some of the historical journals like Kentucky's and Tennessee's have essays on, like there's one in the Memphis and
Mhm.
Charleston. I know there's a couple essays on the L&N. There's a couple books on the history of the L&N
Mhm.
type stuff. But if you want to nerd out on railroads, my grandpa was a railroad guy for Illinois Central. So I do nerd out on that too. But all of this is important. If you want to know why Bragg, did this, or why his movement for his army from Mississippi to Middle East Tennessee, if you will, to go into Kentucky was such a nightmare, well, get the map of Black's book, and then how he has to ferry across Mobile Bay and then up to Atlanta, and then et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
It's and or why Rosecrans couldn't do this, or why Joe Johnson
Yeah.
couldn't do that. Look at the logistics line.
Right. Yeah. If you want to know why certain things didn't happen that a lot of people would like to think should have happened,
Yes.
well, this ex general should have done this. Well, see what their logistical and supply situation was. That'll tell you if they were actually able to do it or not. And oftentimes that they're limited on what they can actually do.
Well, let me end with this one. Civil War Times did an article on this some years ago that was really illuminating. Jeff Davis and Joe Johnson, when Johnson takes command of the Army of Tennessee in North Georgia in December 63, he's like semi-reinforcements. Sherman outnumbers me, 4-1 or whatever. And the carrot and stick that Davis is hanging over his head is, I'll send you reinforcements if you go on the offensive.
Mhm.
And Johnson's like, okay, I need to build up my army and let's see what the enemy does, and then I can respond to that. Well, the War Department with Davis sends him a plan that says, hey, why don't you do this? Why don't you march your army from Dalton up towards Knoxville, hook up with Longstreet, and then come over the Cumberland Plateau and capture Nashville? I do a program called Nashville Siren Song of the Western
Yeah.
Confederacy, because the Confederates 5 times during the war, either directly or indirectly, try to recapture Nashville. Well, as I say, that's the Cumberland Plateau. There was no Interstate 40, and there's no railroad between Nashville and Knoxville like there is now. You're not going to feed off of the Cumberland Plateau because nothing
No.
other than limestone grows up there.
Yeah.
So, and then the third thing is Johnston moving to Knoxville would uncover Dalton, and Sherman goes, wow, the door to Atlanta is wide open.
Yeah. Yep.
Kind of an
It's wild,
impractical thing.
the ideas and the plans that some people had, and then that have today who just don't are not seeing that full situation there, and that's you got to look at that stuff that's going on behind the armies to understand why they're doing what they're doing.
Well, fortunately for Western theater guys, there's a lot more stuff out than there was 25, 30, 40 years
Right.
ago.
Yeah.
Logistics side of things. And then, Larry Daniels got a recent book on the engineering in the Western theater. And
That one is taking like a month for it to arrive at my house. It still isn't here yet. I ordered it.
Goodness, I saw him at a conference in Nashville last year, and I bought it directly from him. But
yeah,
I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we need to help fit, little jigsaw puzzle pieces to make that puzzle look a lot nicer than it did 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's great to see the Western theater focus, because we all know nothing happened at Gettysburg, right? So
yeah, of course not. Yeah. Well, Greg, we really appreciate you coming on here. And by the way, everybody just be thinking of Daryl. He's not feeling it tonight, so that's why it was just me and Greg and I. Yeah. So we originally were going to talk about C.F. Smith and his division at Fort Donelson tonight, but we're going to push that back a few weeks, and we'll jump on that conversation once we're able to fit it into all of our schedules. And so yeah, just Greg, thanks for coming on here and just talking logistics and then whatever it is we wanted to talk about tonight.
Yeah, well, that's you and I tend to do that, and I think you and Daryl, I know, do that, because I've heard all your podcasts and stuff, but that's just what happens when you get a couple of Civil War nerds together, and
you just nerd out.
Yeah, you have the passion for the same kind of a thing, and thank you for doing this podcast and for doing the Facebook page. I'm a board member of the Battle of Nashville Trust. I'm now told our web guy that they need to start posting news on the Western Theater page. There's some big things that BONT wants to do, and I'm going to be pushing more and more content, or try to get more content out to your Facebook group, so I can get out to the people and let people know, because there's amazing things going on around Nashville now.
Yeah, there really is. We're going to have you on to talk about all that stuff too, I think. Just
but Jim Kay is a great expert on the Battle of Nashville. He's been doing it for so long.
Yeah, that's definitely a topic I want to get into, because it's another one of those things that's just by and large undercovered.
Yep.
And my dog is demanding that I take her out, it sounds like. So so Greg, thanks for coming on with us tonight.
Thank you for having me, buddy. Good to see you. And we'll have to coordinate when you can get down and steal a bunch of my stuff.
Yep, I'll definitely be giving you a call soon.
All right, buddy. Take care of yourself.
You too.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks for listening tonight. And we just want to remind you to head on over to westerntheatercivilwar.com, check out our website, join our Facebook group, and on the site, you can support us in this. I think, as we've said before in past previous episodes, Podcastle and Wix, the platforms we use for these things, they just keep raising the prices. So if you would feel so inclined to help us out a little bit, you can buy us a coffee on there, make it whatever you want. We appreciate any and all support. Like we've said before, whatever's left over, it's going to battlefield preservation. So thanks for listening, guys, and we will catch you soon.